Coming up, a special midweek video this week as I was joined by Peter Spencer, political correspondent with Sky News for 20 years and previously with LBC in a similar role. Peter is now a regular guest on GB News, bringing some sanity and counterbalance to their usual right-wing narrative. Peter also writes a hilarious weekly political roundup for online magazine The Malestrom, which I highly recommend for your Sunday reading. We chatted about Dominic Raab, voter ID, the so-called immigration crisis, Brexit and the chances of rejoining, and the state of both the Labour Party under Starmer and Tories under SUNAK at this point. Finally, I asked Peter about GB News. Stay tuned. I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button, subscribe, and above all, share a link to this video with your social media contacts. We're filming this at the weekend, a day or so after Dominic Raab's shock resignation, which I think we all saw coming. But what was your take on that, Peter?
I don't think that SUNAK had any choice whatever. I mean, they are not admitting that SUNAK actually wielded the axe. But the fact that the mini reshuffle that followed was done within a matter of hours, completed, done and dusted, suggests very strongly to me that Sunak has said in that phone call, listen, sorry me old China, but op it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And had he not gone that way, a number of things would have... I mean, what he wanted to do was to close it down on those negative headlines. Had he not gone that way, we'd have had a situation, I suspect, where there'd have been a succession of Sir Humphreys coming out and saying, this is what this bloke did to me, which would keep the story going. Right?
Just absolutely, yeah.
And there's another factor in all this, which you remember Boris Johnson hanging on to Owen Paterson, his mate, who, even though he'd been a very naughty boy, and it cost him a lot of political capital.
Yeah, and Chris Pincher as well after that.
Chris Pincher after that, yeah.
Keir Starmer seems to be trying to portray Sunak as a sort of weak. This word weak always comes up with Sunak. And I think Sunak played into their hands a bit because he had the report in the morning and it took him many hours to actually...
he's a very thorough guy. That he's
well, true. Yeah. And it was a very long report.
And it was a very long report. And half it was in lawyer speak, so there you go. But I don't think he had any option for the reasons I've stated. Also, I do think that had he just gone the other way, as I say, the headlines would have carried on, but in addition to that, he would have looked weak. That's the whole point, you know. Raab has to use the headlines, he's come out swinging.
Yeah.
Well, okay, well, doesn't that overprove the point? Yeah. It's what sort of guy he is.
Yeah.
It's those throbbing temples and I'm a karate expert and all that stuff. I mean, the stories that have emerged in the last few months of younger members of the staff, and they've been saying, look, you know, he's sweetness and light when someone further up the pecking order steps in the room, and when not, he just tramples over us. I do come back to it, that the fact that he's come out swinging in this sort of saying, well, it's all a civil service, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't that prove what a thug you are?
Well, I thought so. It showed no remorse. He clearly doesn't get it still. And, you know, his main point was, 20 odd of the cases against me weren't proven. There were only 2 where they actually found evidence. It's like, don't worry about the people I didn't murder. Don't worry about the 2 people I did murder. There's 24 that I didn't murder. So
aren't I a lovely man?
Aren't I a lovely man? Exactly. Yeah. One thing in the report was this anecdote that when a junior member of staff would make a cock-up, he then asked their manager in to see him, to apologise to him. He asked their boss for an apology. That to me strikes me as somebody that's very, very insecure. I mean, what is going on in his head that he demands an apology from a civil servant?
It's gratuitous and I think cruel. And so, you know, there's always been this match. I mean, years ago, I was particularly friendly with a minister called Estelle Morris, who was one of Tony Blair's ministers, she was education. And she left and she said to me, the Peter thing is, I can't bear this blokishness.
Right.
This testosterone.
Right. So it was the same back then. Well, back then it's not got any better by the sound of it.
That's the point. I mean, there are sort of more sort of flagging up going on now, but it hasn't changed. when they think, look, we've got Prime Minister's questions. Does it really have to be so yarbo and so
I know.
yobbish?
It turns people off.
And it was just with Cameron, I remember him saying, look, I'm really going to just be civil and sensible.
Yeah.
And then within about 3 weeks, it was back to where it was.
And to be fair, Jeremy Corbyn tried the same thing.
Precisely, he did. Yes, he did indeed.
Yeah.
But it's just got its own momentum.
Yes, that's right.
This bonkishness. And I have to say, for a lot of the women to get on in politics, they've got to be more blokish than the blokes.
Well, hence Suella Braverman, Priti Patel. And of course, we don't forget as well, it's not that long ago when we lost Gavin Williamson as well for bullying. So there's a lot of it about, isn't there? It seems to be endemic.
And he was a rubbish minister as well.
He was, as was Dominic Raab. So we've got Dominic Raab, Gavin Williamson, Priti Patel, Suella Braverman. I mean, apart from the fact they're all pretty thick, there's one other common denominator. Oh yeah, they're all Tories. That's right.
Yeah. But Suella Braverman's an interesting case because she was chucked out for a security leak, blah, 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 accidental or otherwise, blah, blah. And then Sunak brought her back, I suspect, because she is his conduit to the extreme right.
To the ERG group and all the rest of it. That's exactly right. That's the way I see it as well. Yeah. Yes. And it makes you wonder what happened with Braverman, where she's broken the ministerial code, yet within, I think it was about 2 weeks, she was back in a ministerial office.
It's a very volatile period, as I recall.
Yeah, but it does make you wonder if there's going to be a redemption for Raab in the next couple of weeks, because it seems to me that Sunak let him go reluctantly, one of his main allies.
Absolutely. No, I mean, if he steps out of character and just zips it, and does a little bit more sorrow than anger sort of stuff, and just basically just does not make any more waves, then I'm sure he'll be back in quite soon.
Next thing I wanted to ask you about was we're just a week or so away from the council elections in England, mainly.
Yeah.
There's many hundreds up for grabs. What's your take on that?
My take is that the Tories are very frightened, and understandably. I mean, we know that the sort of the SUNAK outriders are saying, "Oh yes, well we expect to lose 1,000 seats." This is it's something between damage limitation and expectation management.
Yes.
It's both. I mean, what they're really doing is saying to their core supporters, "Look, for God's sake, don't leave us in the lurch. At least come out and vote." But the reason why they're so particularly anxious is because last time these seats were up for grabs, they lost 1,300 seats, which is a hell of a lot. And it played its significant part in the end of May's premiership.
So what are you saying? You think if they did really badly, it could impact on Sunak's position? Or?
Oh, it could, yeah. I mean, I don't actually think it would fell him, but it would damage him quite badly.
Yes, yeah. Further, because at the moment the opinion polls seem to be narrowing, but I mean, Labour has still got a 15% lead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're still in Tony Blair landslide territory.
Yeah.
And this sort of segues on to, if I may, move it on to Scotland, where as we know, there's £600,000, which seem to have sort of gone walkabout. Now, everyone's innocent till proved guilty, but Mr. McPlod clearly thinks there's something a bit weird going on. The fact that he's arrested Nicola Sturgeon, former First Minister's husband, and then also the treasurer of the party, and most people are expecting that she has got to be
Nicola Sturgeon herself.
Sturgeon.
She's probably feeling a bit left out at this stage. I mean, colleagues have been arrested.
It's like ministers used to complain, why am I not on spitting?
That's right. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, but although the support for the polls suggest that support for independence has remained reasonably high. Support for Nicola Sturgeon's successor has plummeted, and the gap between Labour and the SNP is significantly narrowing. Now, when you consider the fact that up until, I think, 2015, it was Labour heartland.
Yes, yeah.
They've now just got one MP.
Yeah.
And, they'd lost 45 or some large number. Well, if they get a fair few of those back, that's another sort of input to the general election.
If this result we're expecting in the local elections happens and the Tories do lose another 1,000 seats, as you've suggested.
Well, they're bound to do that. It's a question of how many more.
Something I don't know, Peter. I'd be interested in your opinion. You've been in this game a lot longer than I have. But do you think that would have an effect on the opinion polls? I mean, when people see the Tories being routed next week, if that's what happens, do you think that's going to gain some momentum and we're going to see that gap opening up from the 15% maybe back into the 20-point territory? Or is that...
I wouldn't be surprised because it it will have a certain momentum about it. And of course, local elections, clues in the name, there's lots of local issues, but it does tend to act as a litmus test for the popularity of the party.
Yeah.
And because an awful lot of people aren't that much more interested in local politics than they are in national politics.
No.
They just think, oh, they're rubbish, give the other side a chance. That's, or they're brilliant, we'll keep them in.
Yeah.
And and then there is, from the Tories' point of view, there's a danger of that sort of momentum. Oh,
Right.
God, they really are rubbish. So keep it going. I mean, what SUNAK's got to be grateful for is the coronation, which, of course, will...
of course, yes.
blot out everything for
Right.
a while. But,
Yeah.
and the other factor is, of course, morale within the Tory party, which was already extremely low.
Yes, yeah.
It used to be, I mean, they always had traded as, well, we're a united party, a broad church, maybe. But what they actually are now, effectively, is a loose confederation of warring tribes.
Yeah, and I mean... It's not that broad church that it used to be. I mean,
No,
Johnson basically filtered out all the pro-European Tory MPs. You had to swear fealty to the Brexit project in order to stand for a Tory MP last time. So by de facto now you have this extreme Brexit party. It's more like UKIP than a traditional Conservative party, in my opinion. But...
Yes, it is. But that's another huge fault line, because there are still the sort of the centre left sort of, one might say, more sort of sensible. Yeah. And they're a sizable factor, and that will come into play next week with the migrant situation, where we've got the new illegal immigration bill coming up before Parliament on Wednesday.
Right.
And the evidence is, it would appear that SUNAK is prepared to, he's caved in to the right-wing faction, and said, OK, right, well, we're now going to change the law so we can just tell judges who say we can't deport people, just tell them to do one, basically. But also, the word is that he's liable to offer concessions to the sensible Tory MPs and say, look, maybe we ought to work out a system where there actually is a safe and legal route.
Yeah.
Because there currently isn't one.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking before we started filming today, Peter, about this so-called immigrant crisis, and we're talking about, what was it, a total of 45,000 people arriving by small boats last year, which I worked out in the town where I live, in Devon, that equates to an extra 1.8 people in a population of 14,000. It's hardly going to swamp the local hospitals and GP surgeries.
Of course it does. I mean, look, very clearly in specific areas it does create problems.
Sure.
But then they're just places like Dover. Okay, but apart from that, zero.
Yeah.
I mean, just for the vast majority of the country, a 70 million population we can absorb in up to 45,000.
Well, when you look at Germany, it's literally taken millions over the last few years.
Sure. Although I have to say, Merkel paid a price.
Well, she did.
For being a nice person.
But we don't do our fair share, is what I'm saying. But we really don't. But,
and also the fact that there simply isn't. And then Suella Braverman last week referred to it as a migrant emergency.
Right.
Now, let us, just imagine these marauding hordes going around kidnapping our babies and assassinating the king. I mean, but I mean, there is an emergency, and the emergency is in the Home Office.
Yes.
Because the majority, a clear majority of those who apply for asylum actually are granted it eventually.
Yes.
And but there are simply not enough staff in the Home Office to process their applications, and they're not sufficiently motivated, they're not sufficiently trained. As a consequence, there is this huge backlog, which does, of course, cost money.
Yes.
Because as long as they are in limbo, they're not allowed to go out to work for a living, and there's plenty of professional people among them. And even if they're just going to work on a building site, so what? They're not going to be a drag on the economy. In fact, they're going to contribute to the economy because they pay the taxes like anyone else.
Yeah, and you wonder whether it's incompetence or whether it's government policy that they've manufactured this crisis by creating this backlog of asylum claims.
It's incompetence.
It's incompetence. Okay,
I mean, you remember all those years back, and John Reid saying the Home Office is not fit for purpose.
Yes.
Well, nothing much has changed, because I mean, the reason why I believe it's incompetence is the fact that it is expensive.
Right.
A huge slice of our overseas aid budget goes to putting people in hotels or in boats or housing them in potholes in the road or wherever they're going to put them. And so, you know, and it does cost. It costs a lot of money. And so, you know, that'd be a pretty dumb conspiracy, wouldn't it? That'd be a sort of a shooting yourself in the foot sort of conspiracy, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But it is. It's just, you know, it's just, and that's just. That's so. It's sort of they're covering they're kind of covering their own blushes there, really.
Yeah,
and also they've made it up to a large extent.
Yes, they have. I mean, how they've managed to convince, you know,
Yeah.
such a large proportion of this country that it's,
Sure.
like you say, the word emergency or crisis or invasion, all these words that they're using.
And there's lazy journalism, because I tend to refer to it as the migrant situation, because
Yeah.
that's neutral.
Yeah.
But lazy journalism say, well, the migrant crisis, what
Yeah.
crisis, you know, Jim Callaghan, you know. And then the emergency thing, compare and contrast with the National Health Service.
Well, that's right.
Well,
that's the true emergency.
Well, of course it is. You know, I mean, there's Labour research last week which suggested that 1 in 5 of people who end up in A&E do so because they can't get a GP appointment.
Yeah.
Is that an emergency? You bloody betcha.
Of course it is, yeah. But, you know, as soon as the subject of funding for the NHS comes up, there's always somebody pointing, look at those immigrants on that dinghy over there. I mean, it's just a distraction technique, isn't it?
But it's also, I mean, how stupid is that?
Yeah.
I mean, how can anyone fall for it?
Yeah. No video on this channel, Peter, is complete without the B word, Brexit. I published a video this weekend about the benefits of Brexit, just pointing out that all the benefits of Brexit exclusively were in favour of the EU. Tell me, how's Brexit going, Peter?
Well, I mean, it is the issue that dare not speak its name.
The issue that dare not speak its name, yeah.
There are 45 red wall constituencies, which were, you know, former Labour heartland. They flipped over to the Tories, and you look at
on the issue of Brexit, primarily.
Primarily, yeah. Well, you go back to Gordon Brown and Bigotgate.
Oh, Bigotgate, yes.
Yeah, and so, I mean, if you look at the demographic, and of course it's a generalisation, but the demographic suggests that they are generally very, very pro-Brexit, also anti-migrant.
Yeah.
That's quite a lot of seats.
Yeah.
And which is why SUNAK is terrified of using the B word, and so is Starmer. And you know, I mean, which is why the evidence is there, quite apart from the fact that the figures are there for anyone to read, which is that you put together, you add up all the so-called brilliant new trade deals we've got thanks to Brexit, they're 1/16 of the amount of loss that damaged the economy. And this is reflected in opinion polls that clearly, if there were a Brexit referendum today, there would be a very clear majority for staying in.
Yes, and 2-1 actually on the latest poll, which was published this week.
Yeah, I mean, but they don't acknowledge it. That said, I mean, to look a little further ahead, whoever wins the next election, it doesn't have to be until January 2025. Yeah, but whoever wins, assuming they've got a reasonably clear majority, they can then say, right, now, about Brexit, of course, naturally, the nation has decided, which it didn't, it was only a tiny sliver.
Yeah.
But nonetheless.
For a very brief moment in time.
But we can revisit trade terms. And basically get us halfway back, or 2/3 of the way back into the single market, which Margaret Thatcher was instrumental in setting up in the first place.
Of course, yeah. I mean, the main break at the moment is that neither of the main parties are stating a willingness, a desire to go back towards the EU. But of course, when that does change, the main break after the next election won't be, I suspect, so much the politicians. I agree with what you've just said, that they will make these moves back towards a sort of realignment. Yeah. But it's the EU who's going to have the break. I mean, why the hell would they want us back after everything that's happened?
Well, right back into it, they wouldn't want. But if it comes to the single market and basically lubricating trade, they would all be under tremendous pressure from there.
There may be some wiggle room, yes.
Well, I mean, all the exporters in all the various countries and say, look, it make life an awful lot easier. Yes.
It's just that, I mean, at the end of the day, the EU, and I'm obviously pro-EU, but they are a bureaucratic organisation at the end of the day. And they have their rules. And I don't think, as an Englishman sat here, that I can expect for 1 minute that those rules are going to be altered significantly just for sort of the British exceptionalism, that there's some special case. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I think it's going to be tough.
Well, I think so too. Yeah, and it'll take a while, but just the easing, and actually, credit to SUNAK, he's gone to some lengths to build bridges. Remember that Johnson sort of used sort of to
the David Frost
and stuff. All that stuff,
Davis.
Whereas SUNAK has been much more sensible and forged links with the political leadership in France and in Germany, and sort of they're on sort of sensible conversational terms.
It's like we've
lubricated.
Yeah, I mean, I'm nowhere near a SUNAK fan, obviously, but it feels like the adults are back in the room. But
Precisely.
I mean, to say that Sunak's an improvement on Johnson and Truss is like such a low bar. We're talking about Rishi Sunak, Peter. We had the latest scandal, this latest Tory Sleaze story come out last week about this fact that they were incentivising these new childcare professionals and then doubling it if it came through an agency. They then nominated 8 accredited agencies accredited by the government, and it turns out that Rishi Sunak's wife is a major stakeholder in one of those 8 companies.
Yes.
Absolute typical, isn't it? What was your take on that?
Not a hugely good look.
No.
I mean, he had declared it. He hadn't declared it in sort of. He hadn't fully declared it. He had partially declared it, and I think to me that says rather more about competence than it does about sort of sleaziness. I mean, look, the bloke is so rich he doesn't need to take backhand. He just doesn't need it. But he does trade as Mr. Supremely Competent, Mr. Checking the details, and he let that one slip under the radar, and he shouldn't have done.
Yeah. I saw the video from the Select Committee where he was pushed by a Labour MP to declare it because she was aware of it, and he refused to declare it to the committee.
It's possible he didn't even know. I mean, I'm not sort of letting him off the hook here, but I mean, I just think, in the scheme of things, I think it's fairly small beer. It just doesn't help.
Well, I think it just underlines the fact that he lives in a different world to most of us.
Totally. There's one of those little details,
Yeah, people going to food banks, and we've got a prime minister who, I love the work of George Monbiot, and George Monbiot says, we've often had prime ministers that are doing the bidding of the oligarchs, but Rishi Sunak is our first actual oligarch prime minister.
He's one of the richest prime ministers we've ever had.
But talking of Sunak, I mean, he doesn't seem to have shifted the needle in terms of the polls or anything. He doesn't seem to have much of an impact. But you can't help but feel, and I'm non-aligned. I'm just anti-Tory. I've been a member of the Labour Party. I've been a member of the Green Party as well, and I've even voted Lib Dem for tactical reasons. So I haven't got a political scarf around my neck. But I can't help but feel, Peter, that the continuing gap in the polls says more about the lack of appeal from the Tory party than it does sort of give any credence to Keir Starmer as leader of the Labour Party. I mean, it seems like a very soft lead. I mean,
yes, it is. I mean, the Tories, there's a within the history of party, there's always a shelf life, and they've been around for all these years, and people just think, they're giving us. And also, when we had the spike in inflation this year, which is hence the strikes everywhere, and people are suddenly thinking, hang on a minute, we really are a bit strapped, aren't we? Yeah. And then you trace the development of the British economy while the Tories have been in office, and it's been pretty awful. Jolly. It has been awful. Yeah. If there were a more charismatic leader of the Labour Party, it would certainly help.
Yeah.
And I mean, bless him. I mean, Keir Starmer was a very good DPP. He was a very director of public relations. Yeah. He was also a very fine advocate for staying in the European Union. But he does tend to look as if he's just swallowed a wasp.
Yeah.
So there's his eyebrows. It's always so pained.
Yeah.
What about a bit of joy? What about, I mean, what a monster in lots of ways Boris Johnson was, but the fact he said, let's give it a go, good. I mean, that's sort of...
Just had a bit more energy.
Yes, I mean, a bit more appealing, put a smile on people's faces.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, sort of...
As clowns often do, but yeah.
Well, sure. Well, yeah, absolutely, totally. Yeah, I quite agree, yeah. But, I mean,
but SUNAK, Starmer could do with a bit of that, some sort of charisma injection.
He really could.
Yeah.
And, going back to Gordon Brown, when he was just as rubbish as a communicator, to his own huge detriment, it has to be said. He's the bloke that saved the world economy during the financial crash. And did he get credit? No, because he didn't actually project the message. Yeah. But that they used to say to him, they would try every which way to sort of make him seem more, to say, well, he's not Flash, he's just Gordon. Think, oh, bloody hell, are you scraping the barrel from the underside here?
Yeah.
And, they haven't got as far as that with Starmer, but people hate Tony Blair, of course, because of Iraq, and they forget that he did actually do an awful lot to rescue Northern Ireland, and most of his wars were actually defending defenceless people, and long overdue. But what he had this appeal, when he started Cool Britannia, and he could talk human, and he was cool and charismatic and cool, all that stuff. And Starmer just isn't. And it's such a pity, because there's this wide open goal. Will he ever learn? I can imagine that there's been so many people trying to sort of get him to lighten up him.
Coaching him and things. It's almost like, I don't follow football that closely, but it's almost like a team playing without a centre forward, isn't it? The Labour Party. There's nowhere there to bang in the goal.
Sure. Well, I'm afraid that's which is such a pity. The Tory Party have the years they've let the economy slide, and they brought us Brexit, and they
put shit in our rivers.
Yes, indeed. There's so many things so many fronts on which they have failed over the years, and also the fact that they are in politically internally in such a shambolic state. That's the thing that even completely neutral commentators, they cannot fail to make that observation, because it is manifestly true.
Well, absolutely. I mean, they sacked Dominic Raab from the deputy prime ministership, and they're casting around in such a sort of small gene pool to replace him, and they're putting Oliver Dowden in as deputy prime minister. I mean, to me, that just sort of summarises where they're at. They've filtered their own sort of pool of talent by knocking out all the decent people they had, if there is such a thing as a decent Tory. But the Amber Rudds and the Justin Greenings and people like that, the pro-European people, they've all gone. So they've got this incredibly limited gene pool now to choose from.
Yes.
So every time you get this Dominic Raab situation, or the Suella Braverman situation, and part of the reason she probably got reappointed is, who else is there? It's such a limited selection.
Yes.